All right, looks like we're live, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome to another episode of Sasquatch Out of the Shadows Live. As always, I'm your host, Alex Pedikov. I hope everyone is doing great on this Monday night. See, there's already a lot of awesome folks in the chat. So hopefully you guys can hear me loud and clear here. We're just working on some technical issues. Always seems to happen with the show. So we're just kind of working with it here. But I hope everyone is doing well so far and having a happy Memorial Day and remembering those who sacrificed so much to ensure us with the things that we get to enjoy. So hope everyone in the U.S. audience is having a happy Memorial Day so far. But let's get started right away. So for folks that might be new to the channel or haven't seen any previous shows, you can tune into a lot of the other episodes. This is stream 58, so we're almost at 60 shows, which is pretty awesome. I didn't really expect to make it that long. So feel free to check out the previous episodes. There's a whole playlist on the channel. There's lots of other videos as well, and more videos will be coming soon. Last week, we had a great show, actually, with Matt Larson of Central Florida Bigfoot. So it was kind of cool. He comes from a photography background, so we were talking a lot about tech and that sort of stuff and some of his goals. Really cool. So there actually won't be a show on this coming Monday because we'll be up in Maine. Myself, Eli, and Carrick will be up in northern Maine filming for the latest on the Trail of Bigfoot. I always mix these titles up. Beyond the Trail of Bigfoot, which is a follow-up to my first Beyond the Trail of Bigfoot. I was actually just up in Maine yesterday at the International Cryptozoology Museum. It was founded by Lauren Coleman. And I got to do some interviews and some filming at the museum, which was awesome. I also got to interview Michelle Soulier, who some might remember from the early days of the show. She was on way back when I first started the show in early 2020. And I picked up her new book, Bigfoot in Maine, which is really awesome. I've just started it. It's got some awesome illustrations. Michelle's actually done all of those by herself. Really solid book. I mean, lots of maps and sighting reports and stuff that's never been published before. So super awesome. I think it's going to be available through her website. I'll check with her though, but that was an awesome show we had with her on. So Bigfoot in Maine, that's going to be the topic. We're going to do a live stream next Monday when we're returning from our expedition up to the wilderness of northern Maine. But on to tonight's topic. Tonight we'll be talking to Josh. He has a little bit of a presence with Bigfoot data, so I'm really excited to talk to him about that. But Josh is actually an environmental scientist and archaeologist living in Portland, Oregon. He's always been a huge fan of Bigfoot and Bigfoot culture. Recently, while reflecting how Bigfoot folks are always saying scientists won't listen to them, he figured he could be the scientist that would. In order to do that, he has been using skill sets with GIS, Geographic Information Systems, to make state scale maps to compare Bigfoot sightings and other relevant environmental information like black bear ranges, precipitation levels, some of the relevant factors that you might consider when talking about this topic. Some of the maps show little correlation. Other maps potentially reveal lots of insights about potential Bigfoot behavior. Josh is also an outdoor enthusiast. He's thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2007, so I'm really excited to talk to him about that. He's also backpacked extensively in the Cascades, Olympics, Appalachian Mountains, and elsewhere, and has spent countless days in remote areas doing field work for various jobs. Even with all that time in the woods, though, he has never seen Bigfoot or any evidence of stick structures, but he remains agnostic on the subject and on the fence and open to the hunt. So we're really awesome. We're really excited to have Josh on. So without further ado, let's bring Josh right in. How you doing, man?
Good. Hi, Alex.
Thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I just wanted to say, starting out, I really enjoyed the first Beyond the Trail. So yeah, great movie there. Cool angle on the story, and yeah, I really liked it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been cool to see that kind of take off, and that's a bit of a personal case to me. Obviously, that's something I've been sitting on for a while, so it was cool to kind of present it and just kind of lay out the information. And I don't draw any conclusions or anything. So we're taking a much more, I don't want to say gung ho, but much more active approach in this Maine one. We're going to be spending 4 days up in the wilderness of northern Maine, which is basically the most remote part of the whole East Coast. And you would know, you've been up in the 100-mile wilderness. And
yeah, totally.
So we'll be camping like 2 hours north of Katahdin in this vast swath. So we're going to be trying some techniques. We got a lot of cool people we've been talking to behind the scenes. So we're excited. It's going to be great. We're going to have a good time. Obviously, as I mentioned in the intro, Carrick, who's a favorite on the show, a friend of the show, will be on, as well as Eli Watson will be joining us. So it should be a lot of fun. But anyway, to get to the topic, it's really awesome to have you and your, kind of the skill set you bring to the topic and talk about that. So as I always like to start out with guests, you mentioned you've always been a fan of Bigfoot and Bigfoot culture, but what was it specifically that got you interested in the subject?
Well, I'm not alone in this. I think this is a pretty common answer, but it was watching some of the classic TV shows. For folks of my generation, this would have been a rerun, but I think the first thing that got me fascinated with Bigfoot was In Search Of, and
Nice.
I would watch the reruns to all those episodes over and over again. I really loved it. It both fascinated and scared me, depending on the episodes. The Loch Ness Monster episode scared me. I didn't want to get in a lake. When I was a kid, I'd be like, I'll stick close to the shore. And
Sure.
The Bigfoot episode scared me too, but I guess not enough to not hang out in the woods. I've always loved hanging out in the woods ever since I was a small kid. And so, but to get back to your question, that's how I got into it. Then it was, of all the In Search Of episodes, Bigfoot just really hooked me, because even when I was a kid, it felt to me like this was the one that was closest to being real. Like it was the most possible. And I feel like there's a lot of people kind of feel that way about it. And that's why it's the most fascinating. There's so many sightings, and while in my opinion, there's not a lot of it, there is these few and far between pieces of evidence that that really make you scratch your head. And so that's the kind of stuff that keeps me interested. These passionate witness accounts that it's just like you listen to that person say it and you're like, well, they just sound so sure. And there's so many of those. Other cryptids, you might have one or two accounts, and the person might sound sure, but when there's so few, there's such a larger chance of it being a hoax or made up or a misidentification. But when you have so many sightings, and you do have these, handful of pieces of evidence that you just you try and you can't really completely throw them out. That's what keeps me interested after the initial spark.
Right. No, that you're right. I mean, there's just so much out there. I think when compared to other cryptids, obviously Bigfoot and Nessie are probably the two most famous in the world. Maybe Mothman after that, but there's the most research being done on Bigfoot and these similar topics as compared to any other cryptid by far. You have the most amount of people out there in the woods and lending their efforts to it, because it seems to be a widespread phenomenon. If it's obviously, if we're saying it's real, that means that there's a species that's pretty widespread. Otherwise, it's just, as humans, it's such an interest that we have that, far and wide, humans are swatching or getting out there and trying to, prove the existence or have experience of this thing. So I think that's a really cool way to put it. There are, those certain nuggets out there that are just, they really make you wonder. And, there's a lot of BS, unfortunately, that's just kind of comes with the terrain with these mysterious topics. But, hopefully we can continue to attract the attention of folks like yourself that have some sort of a background that, you're involved in the woods a lot, whether it be coming from a scientific perspective or, people that work the land, that sort of thing. I always think it's interesting to get those people involved in these topics and, get their expertise, and everyone's bringing something else to the table. So definitely really cool to have these kinds of conversations.
Definitely.
So just want to say hi to everyone in the chat. We got a lot of awesome folks. Hi, Sandra. How you doing? Bigfoot Society. What's going on? Jeremiah. We got Mike Ann. What's going on, dude? Kevin as well. Carrick, of course. So Carrick of Crash Course Cryptozoology. It's always a mouthful. He will be joining us in Maine, so that'll be a lot of fun. A lot of great people. Max Powers, what's going on, man? A lot of cool people in the chat. Hey, everybody. Tate, we got Tate Hieronymus, of course. I have made it. It started with Tate Hieronymus, who's not related to Bob Hieronymus, so don't get it mistaken. But that's always fun. We have No TM Yankee, from Nottingham, England. Hey, I know it's probably pretty late over there, so welcome and glad to have you tuning in. Alabama Sasquatch I saw as well. What's going on? So, all right, so kind of jumping right into it. You reside in the Pacific Northwest now. Was that coincidental to the Bigfoot thing, or did you gain an interest in it when moving to that area a little more, or how did that kind of unfold?
No, I grew up in Appalachia. I grew up in Western Virginia.
Okay, cool.
I was born in West Virginia, the state, but I really grew up in Western Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley. And,
nice.
Growing up, I didn't think Bigfoot would live in that area. Although looking at the data that I put on these maps, apparently people see it there a lot.
Right, yeah.
But I did not. I moved to the Pacific Northwest following my career and higher paying work that had more opportunities. So, it was almost like a practical move, although obviously it's a great area and I do love it here. And I met my wife on the job out here, and she's from here. And
awesome.
It is a great place to live, and it is the Bigfoot capital of the world. So that doesn't hurt.
No, totally. I know what you mean. I was just there in April in the first time out. I mean, I'd been to Northern California before, but I hadn't been to Oregon or Washington State. Obviously, we were out with the Olympic project up there in the Olympics, and oh my God, what an area!
Yeah, I followed some of your trip via you and Seth's and Mark Matsky's Instagrams, and it looked like an amazing trip. And did you guys, if I can ask, did you guys camp at the nest site? Yeah, we did. We were actually, that's awesome. Eli and myself were the first people with some of the OP members, so Shane Corson and some of the other folks. We were the first ones to actually stay at the original nest sites that were discovered by the surveyor back in 2016, I think. So they had never done that before. So that was a really cool experience to spend 2 nights down there with them. But I'm actually going to be going to Oregon this summer. We're going to be doing some filming up in Northern California with Tate Hieronymus, who's in the chat at Bluff Creek. And then we're going to be coming up to the Portland area to hang out with Cliff and some of those guys and hopefully do some squatch in that area. So I'm sure we'll be in touch about that at a later point. So I'll talk more about that on the channel as well, guys, when that gets closer. That's going to be further into the summer. So we have a lot planned. I just got to say, there's a lot of stuff coming up. So I'm super excited for everything that's coming up. But yeah, I'm glad we linked up. We actually worked on a little bit. You did a New Hampshire Bigfoot map. So that's something I definitely want to talk about. But first I want to get into a little bit of kind of as a scientist, have you been open about the Bigfoot interest? Like, how has that been perceived with like colleagues and stuff like that? Well, because, I'm just like anybody, I get close to my coworkers and our friends, and I will mention that I'm interested in Bigfoot. And, I'm honest, because just like you said in when you read that bio I sent you, I don't necessarily believe that Bigfoot exists. Like I said, I'm agnostic to kind of adopt that term from like a religious standpoint. But so I'm not coming to my scientific coworkers and saying, I believe in this thing. But still, I've never really had anyone I've never really met any of my coworkers that take it super seriously, to answer your question. Right. I'm sure it's got to be, something I saw just in general in Washington, and, it's a little more culturally acceptable than maybe New England or somewhere in the South. It's just not really on radar of like the general society, where I don't know if you guys have Bigfoot Java in the Portland area, but, there's like Bigfoot everything, up in Washington, and it's like culturally pretty well known. Yeah. So I don't know if that helps or not. Even in Portland, it's like a mascot, and people just talking about it or being interested in it there is a difference in the cultural acceptance. Like I said, growing up in Virginia, actually, I do believe there's a Virginia Bigfoot conference at this point, but growing up in Virginia, no one mentioned Bigfoot. And if they did, it wasn't in terms of something that was in the region. Right. So yeah, it's different. And here it is like almost like a mascot of the region from, basically the Emerald Triangle part of Northern California up to British Columbia. It is like a mascot of the region.
Totally. Yeah, that's something I noticed right away. Obviously in Northern California, but in Washington as well. And I'm sure with Cliffs Museum there, not too far from Portland, you got British Columbia, obviously where the term Sasquatch came from, and I've heard from people, Harrison Hot Springs and a lot of those towns, they all embrace Bigfoot. A little bit of a touristy thing. You got souvenirs and statues and some fun stuff. I mean, if anything, it's like you're embracing a cultural icon, similar to maybe parts of Wisconsin that have the hodag, or other, kind of tall tales that are sort of, become part of the local lore. So I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. I think it's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, in addition to something like, very kind of developed and with a good, almost like a culturally interpretive approach like Cliffs Museum.
Right.
There, like a lot of small towns will have like a Bigfoot, I don't know, like a big statue or some kind of Bigfoot themed business.
Right.
There's something called Bigfoot in the Buried A-Frame, which is a tourist attraction run by a Bigfoot researcher that I visited recently. And
cool.
I feel, his name is Joe Bongiovanni. And
okay.
He runs the...
I think I saw him recently on Expedition X, is it? With Josh Gates and those guys?
You may have. I know he appeared on Finding Bigfoot at one point.
Right. I think he was on there. They had like the military vehicles, and they were going out with.
Yes.
I just saw that episode recently because Mark Merzell and some of the folks that are awesome in this field were in the episode. I mean, I don't know if I particularly liked, the way. Yeah, those shows are kind of over dramatized a bit, but it was cool to see that. But I do think I saw him in there. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's that region. That's right near. I mean, as the crow flies, it's actually near that site, the Ape Canyon site.
Oh, that's so cool.
But I was going to say, he has a 28-foot Bigfoot statue that has the ash from the Mount St. Helens eruption worked into its.
Wow.
I believe it's made of cement.
Is that the one that's? It must be the picture then for the the episode here. Yeah, if that's the same one.
It is. Yeah. But I thought I would shout that place out. If you're ever driving from either Portland or Seattle and you're visiting the Mount St. Helens area, stop. It's worth a stop in there. And the other aspect of it, that buried A-frame, is cool in a sort of geological sense, because you see where a mudslide buried this house during the eruption.
And the anniversary of that was just pretty recently, the eruption.
It's sometime in May. I don't remember the exact day.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people posting about it. I kind of did a little bit of my own research. I don't know a whole lot about it. I mean, this obviously happened a long time ago. So I thought it was really cool to do a little bit of research. But obviously, we've heard over the years so many, the tall tales, we can call them that, of Bigfoot bodies being taken out.
Oh yeah.
The helicopters and the special forces, and the typical kind of stories that get spun with these sorts of things. But interesting nonetheless. So very cool.
It's an amazing thing to think about. Doing archaeology work, I would be, say, working 100 miles east of there, and we would note the layer of ash. When we would dig a hole, or like an archaeological unit, as we would call it.
Okay.
You could note the layer of Mount St. Helens ash, like a couple centimeters below, say, windblown sand had deposited over that. It's just it's crazy to think about something like that happening so recently, such a monumental event. Fortunately, not many people died from it.
Right. Yeah, I think I was reading it was in the 50-something people died, which is still, one too many. But
for sure,
I know that there was a lot of even the guys that were, the folks that were really observing the volcano that perished because they were the first ones there, and they just kind of let out the warning cry and went down with the ship, so to speak, unfortunately. So really, it's interesting. It's such a big impact on that area. And it's amazing that the area of Ape Canyon was not affected. That I've heard that side of the mountain was a little bit less untouched. And that woods in that area are still pretty intact, as opposed to the other side where all that debris went. So really, really interesting.
Yeah, apparently the cabin side was leeward of the bluff. So the slide of debris and lava came, and it was protected by this bluff.
Wow.
At least that's what I've heard, actually, Mark Merzell explain on various podcasts I've listened to. I always listen to one with him on it. He's a great interviewee. I love to hear what he has to say.
He's a real nice guy. I had the absolute pleasure meeting him up at the OP, as he's a member of the Olympic Project. He will be on the show, I think, in a couple weeks here.
Oh, cool.
We're supposed to have him on earlier, but there was a mix-up of dates. But I'm definitely going to talk to him all about Ape Canyon. He is like Mr. Ape Canyon. He knows, all about that event, and really just would be great to talk about that. But so when you're out in the woods and everything, you were mentioning you haven't really ever had anything strange happen. You've obviously done a lot of hiking, backpacking, aside from just working out in the field. Has there ever been anything like strange, or what's the weirdest thing you've ever had happen out there, even if it's not Bigfoot related necessarily?
Well, I guess maybe I had mistyped it in the bio, but I meant to say I have seen like a lot of stick structure type things. I feel like anyone who's in the woods a lot, I think that it's pretty common to see, you look at the pictures people share of stick structures or the X's. I mean, if you spend time in the woods, you're going to see those all the time.
Yeah, of course.
And I've seen even more elaborate ones, much more elaborate ones, and like a lot. So That's one thing. And I am very, I won't say I 100% believe that those are all made by Bigfoot. Perhaps some of them are.
Yeah.
Some of the more elaborate ones, are definitely made by like people practicing survival techniques or what have you. But who knows? But I have seen a lot of those. And otherwise, aside from maybe frightening myself alone in my tent because of some strong wind or weird coyote noises, I don't think anything weird has happened to me.
Right. Well, you can get a lot of weird noises out in the woods, and animals can make some surprising noises that you might not expect from the quote run of the mill animals out there. But I would have to agree with you on the stick structure thing. I'm not necessarily sold on it. A lot of people really put a lot of stake into that. I've certainly seen plenty of X's, lots of areas that have winter damage, snow load damage. That's a big thing out here. So I'm always a little skeptical of that kind of stuff. But I've seen some elaborate ones that clearly weren't natural. So whether or not that's people, I don't know. There's only a handful of sightings of anything remotely revolving a structure of some kind involved with the Bigfoot. So bit of a stretch for me. But, again, I haven't really seen any that I was able to say one way or another. But I always like to kind of look at it and determine, did this happen naturally? What's going on here kind of thing. So interesting. But it's fun being out there in the woods, and it's creepy when you're alone, especially because something that maybe sounds small or sounds big might actually turn out to be small. I mean, your mind likes to play tricks out there. So,
and birds and coyotes have a pretty wide range of expression, it turns out. Owls and these other birds they can make some freaky noises.
Yeah, I've talked about that recently, where I learned that coyotes can actually change their kind of like vocal depth to actually make it sound like there's more hundred of them, or there's more of them, kind of like if there's only a few, they'll make it sound like there's more of them. So it's a little bit more of a threat. That actually happened down in Fouke, Arkansas, outside of Boggy Creek area. It sounded like there's 30 coyotes surrounding us, but it was probably only a few, and they were just doing their thing. But yeah, a lot of weird noises out there. I did just want to read this comment from Rebecca. She says the cabin is beside the river where all the mud flowed down. Yeah, and Rebecca actually lives in that area too. She's pretty close, I think, to the Portland area. She's one of the OP members. Super solid group of folks up there with the OP.
Oh, I think Rebecca and I just followed each other on Instagram maybe today. So
very cool. Very cool. Yeah, a lot of awesome folks in the area. Yeah, you're right, Alex. He was in the Ape Canyon episode. Jeremiah was saying in regards to the Expedition X episode. So yeah, right on. So I want to talk about maps, because that's something that I think is awesome. I noticed, I don't know if it was a couple months ago or something like that Emily of the Fourth Floor and some other folks were sharing some of the maps you had done. And I'm like, oh, let me check this out. I wasn't really aware of what you were up to before, and I checked that out, and I saw you were doing these awesome Bigfoot maps where basically you were taking, this is me characterizing it. Feel free to step in anytime. You're taking Bigfoot data from sites like the BFRO or other databases and kind of plotting them on a map and looking for patterns and that sort of thing.
That's pretty much right. Yeah.
Awesome. So is there any reason why you decided to start doing that? I mean, is that something you've done before with any kind of work related projects, or were you just kind of like, let's go for it?
Well, yeah, yes to both questions. I did have kind of a specific inspiration, and I have done similar techniques for work and academic projects that led me to think, oh, like this is something I could do with Bigfoot. So, um, I got the inspiration because I was listening to Bigfoot and Beyond, Cliff and
Oh,
Bobo's
nice.
podcast, and they were interviewing an old time Bigfooter named Henry Franzoni.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Wasn't he didn't do, he did some of those movies. There was that one with like the Goat Mountain Bigfoot thing. Is that the one?
He did, I believe it's called Sasquatch Odyssey, and he's out in the woods playing the drums in the snow. That's
Yes,
him.
yeah. Oh, Andy Matsky would know. He he was like obsessed with this movie. I'm forgetting the name, but there was two versions. We were trying to figure out really some comedic stuff at one part. It
Yeah.
was kind of got funny, but I watched it recently.
Yeah. I mean, the one that he's in that I'm aware of definitely does not take things too seriously.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I think that's the one. Yeah, but there's that famous Goat Mountain, Oregon, Bigfoot photo, which was it's always been making the rounds, but that one, I guess it was the costume that they used for that film at the end where they're kind of like in the mountain there and they're filming and they get that like still shot or the video of it kind of looking around.
Huh.
I think that's the same one because like I said, that documentary, it's like, I don't know if it's edited into two different documentaries. I think it is because I was going over that with Eli recently. We were like, what is going on? There's like two different documentaries, but if anyone knows, feel free to correct me in the comments.
Yeah.
But
Because I know I've watched one, but it was on
yeah.
Amazon at one point. I don't know if it still is, Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, I love some of those older Bigfoot movies. They're just so great. And like, there's such good timepieces, like 80s and 90s stuff. It just kind of takes you right back to then.
Yeah. So, so
Go for it.
Henry Franzoni, he has a very similar career, sort of, as me. It turns out he was talking about that, and he had mentioned using GIS to try to research Bigfoot and look for basically hot spots of activity based on where people had reported sightings and look for concentrations of Bigfoot activity. And that's when the light bulb went off in my head. I was like, well, if he did that, 15, 20, 25 years ago, I should try to do it now because the technology is different and the amount of data that's publicly available is also different.
Right.
And so I do credit him and the fact that he was on Cliff and Bobo's podcast kind of as my inspiration. And then secondarily, I was like, okay, where can I get data that I can plug into this software? So I took a chance and I emailed Cliff just out of the blue, and he was nice enough to email me back and point me to where I could get that information, which is a website called Mangani's Bigfoot Maps. And anyone else can go to that website and get it. You could just Google that and you could get the same data I have. It's about 8,500 sightings plotted with, like plotted in GIS or with latitude and longitude from 14 different reporting organizations, like such as the BFRO. I mean, the BFRO is one, but there's 13 others.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I took that. And then the second part, of your original question is, I thought, how would a biologist use these tools to study an animal, that they thought existed or that did exist? And so I basically just try to do that.
Right on.
And that's like kind of what I know from work or from academic projects is like how biologists would use GIS to study animals. And then I try to apply that to Bigfoot. And the problem is that there is one big caveat is that so if a biologist does a migration analysis on a herd of deer, for instance, their data is coming from like tracking collars on those deer.
Yeah.
if I try to do a migration analysis on these Bigfoot data, it's a sighting. So that's a different like level of data. So any conclusions I draw are marred by that gap in the quality.
It seems like it would make it a lot harder just because that's so anecdotal. A lot easier to track deer. I mean, I can imagine, let's say there was a herd of deer moving through a few towns in an area. People report, oh, I saw the deer here, but then there was a random deer sighting another part of town that gets lumped into the data. So you might have the data not exactly lining up with what's actually going on. A lot of people with the Bigfoot stuff get sort of, kind of not offended, but upset when you talk about the migrational stuff. They say, oh no, they live in the same place year round. And I don't know. I think what makes the most sense to me, and this depends regionally, of course, is maybe migrating following food sources or into other areas. That doesn't mean going north to south, because people think migrations, they think Canada to Florida kind of thing, which is, I mean, large animals don't do that.
Well, totally. When I said migration, I didn't mean like from even state to state. I guess I meant something more like a seasonal round. So they would, what I've been hearing from a lot of Bigfoot researchers lately, and ones that I kind of, what I've been hearing from the Bigfoot researchers whose opinions I put more stock in is that they think it's more like they'll follow seasonally available foods around the region that they live in. And that's a form of migration, but it doesn't imply that they travel from Arkansas to Oregon. So this, so that the Fouke monster is from the same group as, Patty.
Right. Yeah, I think people just get offended. Yeah. People are in this subject. There's a lot of sensitivity, and people are, often upset about things. And I think that kind of migration, I think most people, that are serious about this would agree. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, Whitehall, New York area, for example, I think from talking to Steve Culls and a lot of the folks in that area, it seems to be that during the winters when a lot of the trees thin out, deciduous trees. And this is generally the true, for the most part. Again, we're relying on data from sightings in New England and the Northeast. When a lot of those tree cover is gone, the pine areas, the areas, the cedar swamps where there is year-round greenery, there seems to be a lot of other animals move in those areas. So some have suggested that. I mean, lots of other examples. I think a really good one is Snellgrove Lake, which has been featured in Monster Quest, with Doug Hychek. Friend of the show. I've been talking to him a lot behind the scenes, and his first episode on that Snellgrove incident, they had stuff happening, but the second time they kind of returned, there were no sightings in that area. But a few hours, I guess, to the west is where the blueberries happened to ripen at that time, and there were sightings going on then, right as they were up at the lake. It hadn't really reached them yet in that part of Canada. So it's interesting, maybe the creatures moved down to that area. There's a lot of more anecdotal stories like that, I suppose, but that would make sense.
That's that episode of Monster Quest where like the cabin gets attacked and they put out the board with nails.
Yes, yeah. There's a first part, and then there's a second part where they go back with Meldrum and a lot of the other folks, and they don't really have anything happen. But a few hours away in one of the indigenous First Nations areas, they have fresh sightings while those guys are up at Snellgrove, and then they kind of move down. So interesting.
That's a classic episode of Bigfoot TV.
Oh, totally. And it's really cool because Doug is actually really into it. He's not just a TV guy. I've had him on the show multiple times, and he's coming back on this summer too, talk about some updates. But
I've actually spoken to him as well, and I was struck by his dedication. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, he's
for real. Yeah.
He's really into it. He's not just like a TV producer who's, I can use Bigfoot to get to ratings, because there's plenty of those.
Not at all.
Right. I mean, he lives like the amount of people I've talked to too. They're like, "Oh yeah, I've talked to Doug too," and it's like, I'm glad, because he's really impacting the community in a good way, I think. So I'd love to pull up one of the maps here.
Sure.
Do you have any in particular of the 4 that you had sent me?
The 4 I sent you are kind of meant to be looked at in sequence, because it was an attempt to track movement over the course of the year.
Right.
So I broke it down into the 4 seasons, and then I just did like sightings in Western Washington.
Perfect. Let me just, because I'm going to just pull them all up individually on my, or not individually, all up kind of on my other monitor here. Let me just get that real quick.
So if you look down in the bottom left-hand corner, the little legend on the map should say the season.
Yep, I see winter. We've got summer here. I'm going to put that right next to winter. I'm doing this a very kind of as best I can on here. Oh, this one's not working. Oh, there we go.
So
I'll pull these three up for now. Let's just pop that in real quick.
That's fine.
So I'm just trying to make this work. But yeah, go ahead.
The one that I thought was interesting, I mean, in comparison to the others, and if you have three of them up, it's plenty, was summer. Because, and I haven't done a deeper analysis, which I would like to at some time to like actually kind of prove this, but just glancing at it, it appears that on the summer map, there's more sightings in the mountains in higher elevation areas. And like,
okay, yeah.
To go to what you just said about the blueberries in that Snellgrove Lake incident is that, you know, the blueberries and huckleberries and other high elevation berries are going to be accessible during the summer months, and they're going to be there. And so to me, if you know, I was going to pick out a trend that this analysis I did here showed, it would be that perhaps the Bigfoots are like out of hiding because there's more sightings in summer as well. I have the numbers for that somewhere. Let me see. I think I got my Twitter open. Okay, I have the numbers right here. So in spring, there's 134 sightings. In fall, there's 158. Winter, 123. 118 doesn't have the season attached. But summer, there's 215. So, you know, that's like 45 more than any other, 45 or so more than any other season.
Right. Huh.
So I'm thinking, you know, it's basically like living off the fat of the land. More food is available in more exposed areas during the summer. So you're going to see more of them out there also. But, you know, there's so many ways to interpret this stuff because there's also more people up in the mountains in summer recreating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting point. You know, when there's 4 feet of snow and up in the higher areas, right? And a lot of these roads in national forests, national parks don't get plowed in the winter. So,
and you know, that's where the problem with this Bigfoot sighting data comes in is that if I was a biologist doing this with bears, well, I would have gone out and tranquilized a couple bears and put tracking collars on them. And I would know exactly what these points represented. It represented where those bears were at a given time. And I would know that 100%. But
that is really an interesting point. I mean, I got to read this comment from Kevin. I always got to read a funny comment from Kevin each week. If he throws it in there, he says, maybe we should tag a few Bigfoots to take care of that problem. Shouldn't be too hard. Obviously, tongue in cheek.
Yeah. But with the Bigfoots, each point represents the coming together of a Bigfoot and a person. So that makes interpretation of these analyses less clear cut.
Yeah.
So I like to throw this stuff out here, but as a person who, you know, crunches these numbers and deals with this kind of data, I just like to be upfront about that issue with it. It's
Sure.
open to interpretation.
No, totally. And I think, you know, when you're dealing with anecdotal evidence with sightings, obviously credibility is a big factor. I mean, not all the sightings are going to be completely credible. So even if you take the cream of the crop, then it comes down to, well, what about the research organization? Is an organization that, you know, maybe is excluding certain details, just embellishing? You know, obviously I'm not saying that all groups do this, but, you know, there are certain groups that are less credible than others. So
Totally.
You do run into a lot of those kinds of issues, I think, with this field in general. But it is still really interesting to see a lot of this stuff plot on the map. So obviously, as folks can see here, this is what I'm highlighting here is the winter section. So this is Washington State. Obviously, the greener parts, you can see that's where sort of those temperate rainforests are. That would be Mount Rainier right there, I believe.
Yes.
And this is the Olympic Peninsula up here. And then you've got This would be, is this Mount St. Helens down here?
Let me pop one of those up big, and I can see. Actually, that's Mount Adams. That's
Adams.
Mount Adams, and that's
Gotcha.
Mount St. Helens. Yeah.
So Mount Hood would be down here then. But yeah,
Yep.
but this is then just Washington State itself. Oh, trying to zoom out. So that's just for folks that are watching, that's the winter map. This here is spring. And look at summer compared to just spring. I mean, look at the amount of just dots popping up in the north, what looks like the North Cascades up here, and even down in this area. And then on the far right here, we have fall. So it's just really cool to just be able to see that. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who would just love to see this kind of stuff out there. And I think it's great that you do that and put some of this stuff out there.
Yeah, even though I mentioned like the problem with the nature of the data, I still think it's so cool that there's 8,500 or more points that I can take and plug into the software and like try to look at patterns. It's I think it's something that wouldn't have been possible in Bigfooting a decade ago. And I just saw a place where I could use like a skill I had to try to bring a different angle to it. And
right.
Yeah.
And something I wanted to ask you too is, obviously I'm sure you're relying on a lot of different groups, but the BFRO typically is the one that has the most. Is that true? They have the most amount of sightings that are publicly available?
I believe that most of these probably are derived from the BFRO. Yeah. I mean, when I say most, that could be 5,000 out of 8,500, but I do believe that BFRO is the majority.
Yeah, right. Which they just have the widest reach, so to speak, and they've been at it for a while. So whenever you mention BFRO, people go crazy, and it's very controversial. But fault them for whatever you want, but they have done a pretty good job of collecting some of the data. I mean, I know personally a lot of BFRO investigators that I think are really genuine people. Some that even come from academic backgrounds that they try their best. And something I did want to talk about too, and specifically, was the New Hampshire map that you made. Because I'd love to talk about a little bit of kind of, do you rely on folks like that reach out to you, or that are in local areas that, maybe tell you about stories that aren't necessarily out in the public in some of the data?
I would like to more. Not that many people have reached out to me with that, but I kind of welcome it. And so I was glad to, and I can share my screen. I've got that map up if you want.
Oh, totally. Yeah. If you'd love to do that, I can just remove my screen and just let me know when that's good to go. And I think I pop it right up in here. Max Powers is saying New Hampshire. Yes, please. It's coming up, buddy.
All right. So can you guys see that?
There we go.
Okay, cool. So this is the map I worked on with Alex. And this is really cool because I got county by county sighting numbers from a BFRO investigator that Alex knows. And then I compared that with the sightings that I had in my database, which was only 19 total.
Right.
And, with just the general landscape of New Hampshire, which the resolution isn't great. You might not be able to see labels, but you can kind of see where like the national and state forests are there underneath the county overlay. And so I made the counties darker. The more sightings per county, the darker the county. So you can kind of see trends across the state. And then the points are the sightings that I had in my database. And you can see that, like, for instance, the northernmost county, and I'm sorry, Alex, I don't know the names of them. What's the northernmost county?
It's Coaz County. So similar to Coaz, Oregon. I think there's a Coaz, Oregon, or Coaz, Washington, maybe.
Oh, it's Oregon, but it's interesting. Here it's pronounced Coos.
Coos, okay, yeah. Up here it's Coaz.
Okay, so
sometimes they add the little like two dots over the I, which is some, I don't know, like a Germanic thing.
And what's this kind of middle county?
So you have
Concord in it?
That would be Merrimack. So Merrimack is kind of the central county. That's where Concord is the capital, and then Hillsborough is the southernmost in the middle there. And then, you have Coaz up there to the left of Coaz, the darkest county there. So the one with the most sightings is Grafton. That's most of where the White Mountain National Forest is, as you can kind of see on the map. That's sort of the western portion. And then you have also Carroll County and then Coaz County, where the other part of the White Mountain National Forest is in. So It's a no surprise to me that Grafton County has the most, because I think that's the most populated area of like the White Mountains in general, and it has two of the biggest tourist towns, really, including Lincoln, which you probably would have either gone through or been through if you're doing the AT in that area.
Yeah, definitely.
Franconia Notch is like 15 minutes south or 15 minutes north of Lincoln, New Hampshire, which is like one of the two big touristy towns, including North Conway.
I think I stayed in a hostel in Lincoln.
Okay, cool. Yeah. There's definitely a few of those, but yeah. So what was really interesting, I don't know how we ended up collaborating on this. If you were doing a map on New Hampshire originally, and I wanted to help out, or we were just talking about it, I don't really remember. But so what I did was I sent him my sort of database of sightings. So I know Crystal Panic, who I've had on the show before. She was recently in Beyond the Trail, since it was New Hampshire focused, talking about some of her work, because she's one of the few BFRO researchers for the state of New Hampshire. And she has, and I'll read this straight from my log here if I can find it, she has a total of 263 reports submitted to the BFRO for New Hampshire. And there's like 19 or however many that are public right now, because they're so backlogged that most of the sightings are just not, unfortunately, public. So aside from that, I have personally about 2 to 3 dozen reports. Actually, now probably 3 dozen. I've got another like 5 or 6 just since the last time I sent you that document. We've had this really strange set of circumstances involving Marlborough, New Hampshire, lately. Crazy. I'll get into that maybe with Carrick next week, but. I have a lot of these sightings that I've just heard in passing. People that are researchers have told me, or I've talked to folks and they've told me their stories. They're not typically the kind of folks that would go online and submit to the BFRO or want anything to do with it. They'll tell me their story, and that's about it. That's the only involvement they really want with it.
Yeah, and that's what I think is cool about this map, and that's why I asked you the names of the counties, is because I think that this map shows that the sightings that are public tell a little bit of a different story than the sightings that aren't. So you've got Coos and Merrimack counties with 3 and 4 sightings in them, respectively. Yeah. But then you've got Grafton County with only 2 in the public sightings. But Grafton County has the most sightings in the data that hasn't been made public. So this map shows pretty clearly that certain trends can't be observed if this data is not made public. But that being said, I kind of understand why it hasn't been. Like you said, Alex, it's backlogged, and it's not like anybody gets paid to do this. So kind of understand why it's backlogged, because it's like a labor of love. So I'm not trying to fault anyone, but it just
totally.
It is important to report it and collect reports, and the more reports, the better of a picture everyone has.
Yeah, and that's something just to add to that. I mean, the BFRO people think is this huge overarching organization. And I'm not going to spend my time talking about the BFRO. I'm not a member. I just know from folks that I know that are in it. There's some level of disorganization. There's a free-for-all kind of thing with a lot of regions where people kind of claim it, and New Hampshire just happens to be the case that there just aren't really many people that are doing the work. Crystal has her hands full. People have lives outside of this. Obviously, for most, this is a side passion. They don't do it full time. So, but I did want to say about noticing the map trends. What didn't really surprise me was the fact that Grafton County, being that county that is most of the White Mountains, it's also, as Max Powers points out in the comments, he says the Dartmouth College area is loaded with sightings. I don't know if you're just inferring that from the map, or I know he's up here too. If he has like a lead on that, would love to hear about you telling me about that, Max. But the Dartmouth College area is right to the southern part of Grafton, and then the fact that the 3 southernmost counties of Cheshire, Hillsborough, and Rockingham, which are the most populated parts of New Hampshire. This is where most people, I live in Hillsborough. This is where a lot of people live, and they commute to Massachusetts. And it's an area where there's still a lot of rural areas, but a lot of people living. So they'll have, you'll have a neighborhood, but it's like the kind of neighborhood where your next neighbor, you can see their house, but you've also got moose in your backyard regularly. So it's rural places. So the fact that there's sightings going on in these areas doesn't really surprise me, even if they're just passing through. And Coos County, which a lot of people would think is the most, the most remote state. I mean, it makes sense because it's the least populated, and the population is very elderly up there, and they really only get tourism, for snowmobiling in the summer, hiking and camping, that kind of stuff. So it didn't really surprise me. And my sightings from my database are all over the place, just because I've heard of stories from all over the state. But it definitely is interesting to see those patterns, and I'm sure that's something you've seen with other maps that you've made, noticing patterns, and I do hope that you get to collaborate with other researchers as well about specific areas and specific states.
Yeah, I have had some chances to collaborate, actually. I did a map with Emily, Forest Floor. Just kind of did a map of her research area,
right?
Like basically the kind of area of New England, but just south of New Hampshire. And I've done a number of maps with a fellow named Wes, who goes by Squatcher Metrics on social media.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
He works with the OP as well.
Yeah. I've heard about him. He's great.
I've done some stuff with him because we're kind of very like-minded in terms of like using data software to look at Bigfoot information. And I've done some behind the scenes stuff with him and some maps that we've shared. So it has been fun to collaborate with people doing this stuff. And you mentioned Dartmouth College. I wanted to throw out a quick AT anecdote. I slept in the woods on the margin of the Dartmouth College soccer field.
Oh, nice.
One night, like a hobo.
Hey, man, when you're on the AT, you got to make it work on a through hike. They actually own a couple of lodges, I believe, up in the White Mountains. I know they own part of the trail on Mount Moosilauke.
Oh, really?
I don't know if you would have. Does Moosilauke cross the AT? I don't think so.
I don't remember. I mean, that name sounds kind of familiar, but I don't remember. I remember those lodges, and it's like, if I could get a little AT centric here, it's kind of weird when you have hiked, if you're going northbound.
Sure.
When you've hiked almost the whole thing, and then you get to these lodges, and they're like, "Yeah, you got to work if you want to stay here."
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's kind of like, all right, I guess.
Well, so what's funny about that, as somebody who hikes a lot, and I've hiked all 48 of the 4,000-foot mountains in New Hampshire.
Oh, nice.
Plus foot.
Nice.
So I've run into a lot of AT hikers over the years, and a lot of times we'll give them lifts, like from the Mount Washington area to like Berlin or Gorham, just so they can go and we make sure to ride with the windows open, of course, because of the smell.
Oh, totally. Hitchhiking's a staple of the AT. You got to hitchhike.
Yeah, and the driver has to have the windows down, because you guys definitely acquire a musk and a scent.
For sure.
But run into a lot of AT guys, and that's always so funny up at the High Mountain Huts. So it's the Appalachian Mountain Club. They have these like 8 series of huts that are up in the in the various parts of the White Mountains, and they're very expensive to stay there. People joke about it around here. They call it the Appalachian Money Club, because it's like $140 a night to stay, and you get meals, and there's a crew up there that does like a show, and they kind of sing and dance for you. But it's definitely a little bit of an expensive thing. I've stayed at a hut once with one of my buddies who was a member, and you get like certain kinds of discounts. But I prefer more, the more wild route. But it's not bad when the weather is crazy and you got somewhere to stay, especially in the presidential range, which is just so unpredictable. I don't know if you had crazy weather while you were up there, but it can change on a dime even in the summer. Yeah,
I remember being in the presidential range, and it would like mist in to where you couldn't see, 2 feet around you, and you felt like you're on a different planet. That was very fun. But the lodge, if you're a thru hiker, they have to let you stay there. It's clear that the staff doesn't like it. And they make you sleep on the floor, and you have to wash dishes. And so it's kind of annoying. But it's a place to stay, because you're not supposed to wild camp in the presidential range.
Yeah.
And I understand that. I'm not going to go against that, because that's like for the environment. So
totally. Yeah. It's a very fragile alpine zone, because unlike, the Smoky Mountains, there aren't really any alpine zones down there. And in other parts of the Southern Appalachians, it's like a lot of the peaks, even that are 6,000 feet, are completely wooded up to the summits. So even Mount Mitchell, which is, a couple hundred feet taller than Mount Washington, tallest peak on the East Coast, east of the Rockies, there's like a platform up there so you can just see above the tree level. Whereas up in New Hampshire, we have a lot of these mountains, even at 4,000 feet, that have an alpine zone. And that's a very fragile environment. So they don't want people just wilding out and camping everywhere. As it's been done in the past. Plus, it gets super cold up there. I mean, I've been up there in early September, woken up to 20 degrees outside. It's no joke. So also, but did you do a northbound when you did it?
Yeah, did it northbound, awesome. Georgia to Maine. If I could throw out another anecdote, because you mentioned Mount Mitchell. Go for it, man.
I love it.
I got stuck in a blizzard in the Smokies, like right near Mount Mitchell, and ended up walking down the road from Mount Mitchell because long story short, I was meeting someone in town or whatever. At that point had been the plan, but the road was blocked because trees had fallen down over it so much. No. And the night before, I had walked in just a full blizzard, and I had planned to camp, but I couldn't because, to be frank, I just didn't have the experience to know how to camp in those conditions at that point.
Right.
And so I just had to keep going and going and going until I found the shelter. And it was probably one of the most frightening nights for me because of all the things that are like in the woods. Hypothermia is really scary.
Yeah, the weather is the most terrifying for me, because it can just change so quickly. But
you can't defend yourself against that.
Right? It's not a bear.
You kind of live and learn. But that's totally. Somewhat early on, so I was like a little green.
Yeah, right. I'm sure by the time you got up to Maine, you had a lot of experience under your belt.
Yeah.
And that's an amazing experience. I've never done the AT, but I've done section hikes in the Smokies and up here in New England, and just some of the most beautiful terrain, and hiked in Virginia and other areas as well. There's just it's very squatchy areas too, if we want to use that term, to borrow that. And I think a lot of people get surprised when they come up to New England and they see New Hampshire and Maine, some of the rural areas in the wilderness. It maybe shocks people that are not from this area that we have that kind of wilderness up here, which is one of my favorite things to show people when they first visit this region.
Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, I guess. But
sure, yeah.
Don't they say about Maine, I feel like this is a Maine saying, you can't get there from here. Does that ring a bell?
I'm not from Maine, but I'm sure I probably would. I'll check in Michelle's book, see if there's anything on it. But yeah, it's wild.
It's populated down in the southeast corner, and then there's that what they call the Golden Road that kind of goes around it, and then it's like nothing up in there.
And that's what's crazy about it. So what I was talking about at the intro of the show, we're heading up actually to that area of northern Maine. So you have Mount Katahdin, which would have been the final place on the AT, where you would have been. Baxter State Park, beautiful area. Once you go north of there, it's basically the largest swath of land that's not owned by either state or federal government. So a lot of land like out west is BLM or national parks, national forests, whatever. This area is all privately owned. It's logging companies and private landowners, and they actually allow recreational use. So it's the least populated area on the entire East Coast. There's this awesome, talking about maps, I believe I've talked about it on here before. There's an awesome website called Nobody Lives Here or something like that. It's a map site.
I've seen that, yeah.
Yeah, and you can see like population density. If you look at the entire East Coast, up and down, even in some of the areas down south with a lot of wilderness, they're still close, like Chattanooga or the Gatlinburg is right near the Smokies. So you have population centers right near the big mountains. But up there in Maine, it's just 5 hours north of Portland, it's just woods. And that's where we're going this weekend. Actually, we'll be up going like a couple hours north on logging roads past Katahdin, and it's the Allagash River waterway up there, which is just super wild, and there's nothing there. So and that's what's really interesting about Michelle's book is just some of the reports in here, and some of those logging types that just don't like to really share their stories. So there's I think there's a lot of potential with a place like Maine, and New Hampshire shares some of those characteristics in the northern part of the state, but we're definitely more populated in other areas, which is why I think there's a little bit more sightings or sighting data to work with than Maine itself. And the people up there are like fiercely independent, so they're not really keen to share about this stuff, and it's not as culturally prevalent here at this point. So
yeah,
so really interesting, but But yeah,
That sounds like a cool trip.
oh yeah, we're super excited. It's going to be great. But I did want to take some comments and
Sure.
questions from the chat. I know, I'm sorry guys, I've been neglecting you all. There's a ton of comments coming in. I'll take this one from Carrick first, and then I'll read through some of the other ones. So Carrick asks, "Hey Josh, I recently had a discussion with someone about the all serious attention to the UFO phenomena from the government recently. Do you think Bigfoot may go in the same direction eventually, and why?"
Well, I don't necessarily. I'm going to preface this by saying I don't feel like I'm qualified to answer that question. But if I had to throw down an opinion on that, my answer would be no, because I don't think so. The UFO thing, if there's unidentified flying objects in our sky, that is something that the military at some point has to answer.
Right.
Like their whole point is that there's nothing in our sky that they don't know what it is. Like
Yeah,
that's the whole reason they exist.
sure. It would be a convenient way to get some extra funding too. So
Right. Bigfoot is not a national security threat. There's no
Right.
reason for them to care about it, and I don't think that they would ever talk about it. Again, I'm not qualified to answer that question, but if I had to throw down an opinion, that would be it.
Totally. No, that absolutely. It's been really interesting seeing a lot of the conversation, like the Bigfoot sphere, given that the UFO stuff is happening. Obviously, we're not the same community, but there's definitely a lot of Bigfoot adjacent UFO, a lot of crossover between the communities and people interested in both. So it's been an interesting conversation looking at the UFO side. And I'm like, wow, these people, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but how does it translate to Bigfoot? So
I have made some Bigfoot and UFO maps. So if you scroll down in the feed, you can check those out.
Sweet. Speaking of that, yeah, Bigfoot Anon says, "Love Josh's IG. Check it out." So
Thank you.
Josh's Instagram. I do have it linked in the description below. So go check it out. Follow Josh. Definitely somebody to look out for, because I think I hope other researchers as well will lend their data, because this data, like the stuff that I gave you, I've just been kind of sitting on that. I gather that over the years, and people tell me their encounters, and eventually I'll probably put it into a book or something, but I haven't really done a whole lot with it. People ask to see it, I'll give it, but it was really cool to be able to give it to you and have you add that to the pile and see if we can find any patterns. So I do appreciate you kind of taking that endeavor up, which is awesome.
Totally. You're like a good example of what I can do if somebody, reaches out and gives me an idea.
So now you're just going to get bombarded with all the people in the audience that are going to be sending you all their data. You're going to be busy for the next year. So Kevin actually says, I've actually mapped my home province of Alberta. There is definitely a Bigfoot zone that runs along the eastern slopes of the Rockies. 90% of all reports are in that corridor. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's something I'm sure Justin Chernopesky over on Mountain Beast Mysteries. I've kind of talked to him a little bit about that too, and it makes sense,
Yeah.
So
yeah,
Matt,
I have.
Sorry, go
I was
ahead.
just going to address that a little bit. I have, the data I have includes a lot of Canadian sightings, and I'm looking at my national map right now, and it does appear. I mean, mine seems to show the same thing. The eastern side of the Rockies up in Canada seem very dense in sightings.
Right on. Yeah, no, totally, and I think that's what's interesting when I look at it, comparing like the East Coast to the Rockies, the Intermountain West, and then out to the Pacific Northwest, where it seems like there's more contiguous terrain, like the coastal regions of British Columbia down to Northern California, all in between. And on the East Coast, the Greenway, the Green Tunnel, the AT. There's good terrain anywhere, especially here in New England. Whereas the Rockies and some of those areas, like in Colorado and Utah, and up in Alberta, Montana, Idaho, some of those areas, it's like there's patches of forest. They're not really super contiguous in areas. So that's something I want to focus on in the future, is just like the isolated little pockets, and maybe that can be more fruitful than dealing with such wide open spaces. So Alberta, I'm sure, is pretty similar to a lot of the Rocky Mountain areas we have here in the U.S. So Max asks, have we looked at sightings in Maine during blueberry season? That would be really interesting to do. I can't tell you the amount of blueberry stories I've heard from across New England, where it's like almost cliche at this point, where it's, we were, it was August, it was late August, and we were getting some wild blueberries. We saw a bear, and then it stood on two legs and walked away and looked like a gorilla. So yeah, I've heard that like 5-6 times at this point. So that would definitely be intriguing.
Unfortunately, I don't have a huge amount of points for Maine, like
Yeah.
almost not enough to do a meaningful map. So, well, let me look here. I'm looking at a map right now. Yeah, there's only a handful of points in Maine, unfortunately.
Sure.
So that's as Alex mentioned, people in Maine are pretty stoic, pretty taciturn.
Yeah.
That's something I ran into when I have been in Maine trying to just talk to people, and people are a little they like Alex said, people keep to themselves, and it wouldn't be like out here in the Pacific Northwest where everybody's like, oh yeah, I saw Bigfoot the other day, and
Right.
that's reflected in the data I have. So it's hard to make a map you can draw conclusions from if you don't have a lot of data points.
Totally. And, just since Bigfoot in Maine is just so fresh in my head, having been up to the International Cryptozoology Museum yesterday and talking to Michelle, point that she made was, a lot of these folks that work off the land, either in the logging or you're very close to the land, they may have stuff happening, but they won't talk about it until they're retired because they're out there all the time. They're dealing with it. It's not something they necessarily might want to deal with, but she has had a lot of people that have told their stories well after retirement when they don't really have to worry about, well, what people are going to think about me. Is this going to affect my career if I suddenly start talking about, having my equipment messed with this thing that's running around the woods and I'm seeing it, every once in a while. So it's pretty interesting when you kind of look at it from that perspective. And that's not just the case in Maine. I mean, plenty of other parts of the country where you have that sort of thing going on where people are probably reluctant to talk about it maybe until later on or just at all. And with the inadequacies of some of the online databases, as Alabama Sasquatch here says, the BFR Alabama reports are pretty slim. And I've heard a lot of reports from Alabama, and I'm sure there's other groups down there that collect reports too. So maybe in some states you have more of like a BFRO presence. Other states maybe more of another research group's presence. So that's what's good about, I guess, using different databases, but it can definitely get tricky. So yeah, I mean, it's man, once you get the juices flowing with the Bigfoot data, because I think it's something that's not talked about as much in this subject. People talk about a lot of the big events, the Patterson-Gimlin film, Ape Canyon, some of these things, which are great, good to know the history. But looking at the data like this, I think, is extremely important. And I'm glad you brought up Squatchermetrics earlier. You mentioned they were working with the OP. Those guys couldn't stop praising Wes, who's I believe over in the UK. So I would love to see more stuff on that in the future. You guys working together, I mean, just seems like a great collaboration there.
Yeah, it was kind of a natural matchup, and I think that when I had been talking to him, he was going to get some mapping software of his own, maybe throw out some of his own maps. So,
right, totally. I mean, I would love to see that kind of stuff. I did want to read this comment. Illuminathan says, had a sighting at Killington, Vermont ski resort 25 years ago, and then follows up with 20 other people had the same sighting. Pretty crazy. I had no idea what I was looking at until years later. Oh, it's pretty interesting. I would love to hear more about that. I mean, I've been to Killington skiing before. Pretty interesting to hear that. So if you want to share that at any point, feel free to send me an email. So
I can say that Mount Killington was one of my favorite places on the AT. I remember at the top of it, there's a shelter that is, I believe, like an old ski hut, but it's become an Appalachian Trail shelter. And I got there in the middle of the day, so I didn't sleep there, but I ate some lunch there.
Yeah.
And it was just another like misty day, and that part of Vermont is so beautiful, and the terrain is like kind of forgiving compared to some places,
right?
And it's just so much fun.
Yeah, Vermont's a beautiful state, a lot of beautiful history. I mean, Lake Champlain. I don't know if you probably didn't have a chance to go there while you were hiking. I know it's tough to take like trips when you're so focused. You don't want to like spend all the time moving around. But
no, I didn't make it to Lake Champlain.
If you get a chance to come back up here, Lake Champlain, so beautiful because it's nestled right between the Adirondacks and the Green Mountains. So the views on either side are amazing, and obviously you have Champ. So it's just a lot of fun. That's one of my favorite non-Bigfoot cryptids. So,
did you do the movie? Am I correct that you did a movie about Champ?
Yeah, I did On the Trail of Champ back in 2018 at this point. Yeah.
I watched that one. I like it. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's just a fun topic. I mean, we did a Chasing Legends episode on that, filmed last September. Just a lot of fun. I mean, I love the lake monster stuff too. But people think I'm often really just into Bigfoot, which it's just so widespread. But lake monsters are like another kind of big passion of mine. Something about the water, it just fascinates me. So definitely hope to be returning to that. But I did want to read this comment from Brian and Should We Go Hiking? So Brian's actually a big hiker. He's been posting a lot of, he's doing the New Hampshire 48 right now. And he had a sighting while hiking, I believe. But he says data is so important to figure out these beings, whether it's a migration to going where the food is plentiful during certain times of year. Yeah, and that's certainly something we can hope to gain in the future at some point. A little bit more insight into what's going on here. He also says, Alex, you definitely got to set up trail cameras around blueberry patches in New Hampshire. Yeah, I would love to do that. I would love to do that just to get some bears on there. I mean, I was just checking my trail camera today. I got this young buck looking at it's the second time I've got him looking right at the camera. It's the same one. Trying to get the moose that I got once on there, but haven't had luck to get him again. So it's awesome just to see the other wildlife. Now, something I did want to ask you about that is, when you're looking at obviously areas that might be suitable for something like a Sasquatch, and you mentioned, I think it was you were talking about earlier in relation to like other wildlife, black bears and that kind of stuff. Do you look at that data and other wildlife data as well?
Well, yeah, and that's one of my favorite of the maps I've made, and this was actually the one I collaborated with Squatchometrics with Wes on, and that I did a comparison. I'm trying to scroll down my Twitter to pull the maps up so I can talk about it better, but did a comparison in the state of Colorado with black bear range and Bigfoot sightings. And I thought it was really interesting because, okay, here we go. 124 out of 126 total sightings occurred within the black bear range.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, very much so, yes, I think that's a very valid way to look at it. You find an animal that we know is prominent in North America, which is a black bear. They're very prominent. They're like everywhere. And we could infer, or we can kind of reasonably guess that they would have similar nutritional needs to a Bigfoot.
Right.
And if you're a believer, that map really kind of gives you some backup on that. But it's funny because, saying that they're open to interpretation, this map can be interpreted one of two ways. Either Bigfoots and black bears share similar nutritional needs and therefore share similar range, or every time someone is seeing a Bigfoot, they're actually seeing a black bear.
Right. Mistaken identity, which I would argue is probably a portion of sightings. I mean, you have to account
some proportion, for sure.
Right.
No question.
Most similar in appearance. I mean, at least a lot, that dark color in a lot of the reports. So, with these topics and, whether it's lake monsters or Bigfoot, UFOs even, talk to a lot of the UFO people, they'll tell you, well, most sightings turn out to be mistaken identities. It's a lot harder with maybe craft in the air to tell what you're looking at, because the sky is such a strange thing to people. It's always been interesting, but a certain degree of sightings can be explained away through normal phenomena.
So, but with this bear information, so there's different types of bear information I was able to get, and one of those types of information was like something that I guess bear biologists had defined as human conflict zones.
Yeah.
So I was able to see how many of the sightings occurred within known bear-human conflict zones. And that was only 19 out of 126.
Wow. So that's,
So that kind of, if you want to go down that road, that kind of lends credence to the idea that maybe the pro-Bigfoot interpretation of the first map I mentioned, has some validity. Because such a small proportion of those sightings occurred where bear and human conflicts are known to be a prominent phenomenon.
Yeah, and I mean that's the kind of situations like you have often in a lot of places, like towns that are bordering the wilderness where you have bears coming in. I mean, I've seen hotels in being in Colorado Springs one time, and the hotel, they had like a framed picture of the bear that they have that always comes through and eats their garbage. And the same thing happens up in the White Mountains. A lot of these areas where you have that conflict zone, a lot of times, unfortunately, it ends very poorly for the bears.
That is unfortunate. Yeah,
they have to be liquidated by Fish and Game or whatever agency runs it. I think it just kind of, I don't know, adds to my general dislike of humanity, I suppose. These bears don't really know what's going on.
No, I agree with you there. It's not their fault. They just they're programmed to eat. If the garbage is there, they're going to want to eat it, and then they get killed for that. You hate to see it.
They're opportunists. I mean, like you really can't blame them for it. Easy meal's an easy meal. Who wouldn't do that? But it's unfortunate. So I'm going to take this. I think a comment from Ignacio says, "What about the other way around? What if Bigfoots are mistaken by black bears?"
Well, I'm gonna say, does he mean like mistaken for black bears? So
I probably think for black bears. Yeah.
So people see a Bigfoot and they think they saw a black bear. Is what he's asking.
Part of the Bigfoot trickery.
Maybe so. I mean, if Bigfoots can shapeshift and cloak and all that stuff, like some folks say they can, then perhaps. But I would imagine, not to make fun of the question, because I would imagine if a misidentification goes one way, then it can certainly go the other way.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if that was tongue in cheek, but obviously my response, I suppose, is a little bit. There's probably a Bigfoot.
I'm guessing it was kind of a joke, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's probably a Bigfoot who's got a black bear, rug in his cave, and he throws that on every once in a while. Like, let me go mess with the humans. Awesome. But yeah. So yeah, no, it's definitely something to think about too. I mean, in a lot of these areas. Now, something I've always been really interested in is the precipitation levels. So I've heard it talked about with gorillas and other primates that they need a certain amount of precipitation to exist. And if you do take like a map of Bigfoot sightings or publicly available Bigfoot sightings and map it with precipitation throughout the United States, you notice clusters. And I've noticed the Pacific Northwest being the areas where you have the most amount of precipitation in the cases of the temperate rainforest. That's where the most sightings are. And then like in the Midwest, Iowa, the cornfields of Kansas, there's almost no sightings. And then you get east where there's the mountains and the forest, there's sightings pick up. Have you noticed any patterns like that?
So I did a precipitation map.
Okay, cool.
I might have chosen the wrong state because it didn't really correlate with that thought about Bigfoot sightings. But the thing is I chose North Carolina.
Interesting.
And the sighting distribution in North Carolina is weird because conventional wisdom, you would think they'd like most of the sightings would be in the Appalachian part of North Carolina, the western part.
So you think, right? Yeah.
Which is also the most wet. But that is a small part of the state. And okay, they are densest there. They're packed in there, but the majority, just raw majority of the sightings happen in either so on the east, sorry, I thought for a second I was talking to someone out west, but that like kind of on the eastern seaboard, the middle part of states, they call it the Piedmont. And then
yes, yeah, that's the Virginia, the Piedmont area. Yeah, no.
North Carolina, they do that too. So the vast majority of these sightings in North Carolina are in the Piedmont for some reason, which is a low precipitation.
Yeah. For
North Carolina, which is a rainy state. I mean, it rains a lot there in the summer.
Well, that's what's interesting about that.
And then there's a weirdly.
Go ahead.
Yeah. There's a weirdly large amount of sightings like on the coast of North Carolina, and I don't know what that's all about.
So it's something interesting you're mentioning that now. Obviously, that whole region down even into the South Carolina and from up in Virginia, that area was that was like the United States hundreds of years ago, right? The mountains or the Smokies or the Blue Ridge Mountains, that whole area was kind of the border. That's where the Western Irish border, and some of those folks that are kind of in Appalachia today. That's where those people moved, where nobody else really wanted to go there. So where all the rich farming land and where a lot of the unfortunate history of the United States took place, and it was in those coastal flat areas, which easiest for resources. At least from my understanding of having spent some time down there. So
That's all true.
it's really interesting. I've actually talked about it with Ken Gerhard a few years ago. He was down there at a conference in Medoc, North Carolina, which is apparently a lot of sightings coming out of that area in the past few decades. And I was talking to him like, "Oh, is that up in the mountains?" And he's like, "No, no, it's towards the coast. It's a very wooded area." He said they've started opening it up for some logging, and there's like a lot of virgin timber around there, and there happens to be sightings, but it's completely flat. It's not mountainous or anything. And I'm like, "Oh, that's really interesting." So that now that you're talking about that, actually, that is pretty intriguing and kind of makes me wonder.
Well, the thing I guess I sort of joked about when I first made this map and first posted it was maybe they're some skunk apes that ranged farther north than people think they do,
Yeah, right.
Because skunk apes are thought of to be more coastally and like sort of swamp or wetland oriented critters.
There are swamps in North Carolina too, and South Carolina.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Comment from a thru-hiked man. He says supposedly the Great Dismal Swamp in the northeast corner of North Carolina and southeast Virginia has some level of sightings.
I was about to mention the Great Dismal Swamp.
I believe that.
As an area that would be very similar to like, and I'm spacing on the name of it, but whatever bayou the Falk monster is supposed to live in.
Yeah, that's Mercer Bayou.
Mercer Bayou and
Bayou, yep.
Great Dismal Swamp would be fairly similar ecosystems.
Yeah. Throughout the South, I mean, that's I don't know. I went down this whole thing a few years ago learning about bald cypress trees because I was really interested after going to not North Carolina, Louisiana a few times, seeing, knowing that they're actually related to sequoias and redwoods, that they're in the same family group, and they are some of the tallest trees basically east of the redwoods and the sequoias. And in Louisiana, they cut down most of the large ones. Otherwise, they would be towering in the sky now. But all throughout the South, you see the bald cypress trees. And I think the oldest one in the world is in North Carolina.
Oh, interesting.
Somewhere like 4,000 years old. And I think they said it's pretty wide.
I bet.
Someone can feel free to check me on that. I'm not sure. I'm going to do like a Joe Rogan, like Jamie, check me on that.
It's funny that you bring up bald cypress because, like, just with my day job, you would be bored by the amount that bald cypress has had to do with certain projects I've had to.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
They're cool. I mean, I like cypress knees, they're just, they're neat.
I've done a lot of work in Louisiana.
Oh, nice.
North Florida, and a lot of my work has involved like identifying areas of bald cypress and so on. It's boring, but anyway, I'm familiar with the species.
Man, I'll tell you, I'm a huge info nerd, so I'm sure we could probably have a whole conversation about bald cypress trees at another point. But no, I think for me, I'm interested because that's not really an area I'm familiar with. I'm a mountain guy. I love being in the mountains, whether it's out west or out here. So I love being in the South too, because it's just a different vibe. The swamps, everything's alive. It really makes my senses kind of come alive a lot different than in other areas. So that's just me being kind of nerdy. But he follows up, thru-hiked man follows up with the portion of North Carolina is the Great Dismal Swamp State Park. The portion of Virginia is the Great Dismal Swamp National Wildlife Refuge. Yeah, really cool. So definitely place to check out, I guess, if you're going down that area and you want to see a cool swamp.
Yeah.
Very awesome. So yeah, man, it's been really awesome to have you on.
Totally.
This kind of stuff is just, it's fascinating. And like I said, I don't think in this community or this topic, we focus as much on the data side of things often. It's more not necessarily the sensational sightings, but the sightings, the encounters, that kind of stuff. Whereas the data, I think, is something, if we're moving into more of a direction, hopefully we are, of this being taken more seriously, having people like yourself kind of on the side of this or taking it seriously, just looking at the data. If we can get clean, good data to folks like yourself, I think that's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I think because like you just observed, people are interested in the kind of exciting stuff, and I've always felt like these maps are a little less exciting than some Bigfoot information. Because of that, I've been really happy with how much people like it, and thank you so much for having me on your show, and thanks everybody who asked questions. I recognize a lot of you guys from Instagram, so and some from Twitter. So appreciate the follows and the comments on the show, and it's just been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Pleasure's been all mine. Yeah. Thank you guys for obviously comments, questions, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure everyone now wants to see their state or their province with sighting maps. So if you're interested in that and you have some data to contribute, I mean, feel free to send some to Josh. I did link, I believe, his Twitter and Instagram. One of the two or both are definitely in the comments or in the description of the video. So feel free to go check them out, follow them out, and definitely if you have some awesome maps, I would love to keep sharing that and hopefully have you back on the program at some point, maybe down the road when there's been something interesting going on or some new data to share. I like kind of following up with people as well. So
awesome. Yeah, I'd love to. And I was going to say, if you only linked one or the other of Twitter, Instagram, it's the same.
It's the same kind of thing. Perfect. Yeah, I think I put them both in there. So Kevin says, thanks for putting in all the work, Josh. A database like yours is invaluable. It deserves acknowledgement. I wholeheartedly agree. Max Power says, thanks. Thank you, Max, for your comments and questions. Definitely will have to talk to you soon about New Hampshire. Sandra says, good night, everyone, and God bless. Thank you. Great show, Alex and Josh. Thank you. Be kind. I like that. Be kind. Great shows. Thank you so much. Yeah, so like I said, guys, feel free to give Josh a follow. Thanks to everyone who questioned and commented and for tuning in, guys. Awesome to have everybody on. As I mentioned, there won't be a show next Monday as we'll be kind of returning from our expedition to Maine, but we're going to do a live stream with Eli and Carrick for sure, just like on the go, maybe even in the car or on the coastal area in Maine. We're going to go check out some lighthouses. So we'll try to do a live stream for sure. But I just wanted to thank everybody again and hope everybody has a great rest of your week. And we will see you guys next week then. So take it easy, everybody.